Okay, good morning, everyone. Today we are finishing up Judges. So I'll go ahead and let you know right now, next up is 1 Samuel, and the books are in the back there in the foyer, so if you would please pick up one of those per person, we'd appreciate that, and we'll be ready to start that next week. So we're going to kind of skip over Ruth because I'm going to do some sermons on Ruth at some point in time, but we're going to keep going chronologically with what's happening in Israel and move on to 1 Samuel. So you can be prepared for that. We'll do an introduction to the book next week. But first, we need to look at Judges 21 and put an end to this whole saga that started with the Levite and his concubine and continued last week with the destruction of Benjamin, the near extermination of these people, and really a lot of death all around. The rest of the tribes of Israel lost a lot of people as well. But simply because they outnumbered Benjamin so severely, the losses are spread out a little bit more among the 11 tribes when compared to Benjamin. And in chapter 21, we see an abrupt change of mind, a change of opinion of what needs to happen on the part of the people, and we end up with a very strange situation all around. So, who do the people blame for Benjamin's devastation?
God.
Yeah, they're blaming God. And that is such a strange thing for them to do at this point that we need to talk about how they got here. So we have a little flashback first, back to that meeting at Mizpah where the Levite was making his accusations against Benjamin, against Gibeah, and something that was not told to us before but is said now is that in their anger and rage and their decision to go and to attack Benjamin, they also swore an oath, this is verse 1, no one of us shall give his daughter in marriage to Benjamin. That's an easy sort of thing to swear when you have decided to exterminate these people. We're going to go and destroy them, and if any are left, we won't marry our daughters to them. But now they are regretting that, because now in the aftermath of all of the destruction, as they've seen that Benjamin is on the verge of extinction, they regret that things have gone this far. And so they all come together to Bethel. They sat there before evening before God. They lift up their voices and wept bitterly. And they said, verse 3, and I want you to note how they say this, O Lord, the God of Israel, why has this happened in Israel, that today there should be one tribe lacking in Israel? And we've got some repetition there with Israel and with calling God specifically the God of Israel, in that they're putting the blame on him. They're saying, you are the God of all of us. You are the God of this nation, and one tribe among us is going to fade away into nothing. They're not going to be able to sustain themselves. Too many of them have died. And God, why have you let this happen? Why have you done this to us? And what are you going to do about it? Now, that's a bit curious because this is not God's fault, of course. This is all the result of sin. First from Benjamin, in that they did double down on the sin of Gibeah. They did grow quite stubborn in their refusal to allow for justice. But also, the rest of Israel did not ask God whether they should go and attack Benjamin. And it was clear that God disapproved of the way that they were going about this by virtue of the fact that he let so many of them die. When God was with them as they're attacking their enemies, they can overcome anybody. It doesn't matter how strong the enemies are. The Israelites can have great success, but here we see a much more tumultuous picture, that they lose horribly in 2 battles, and then they are successful against Benjamin. So as much as this is a judgment against Benjamin, it's also a judgment against the rest of Israel for their misconduct and their lack of following the covenant as God has commanded them. And they go very strongly in this direction of exterminating Benjamin. We saw last week that they pursued them very persistently. They killed seemingly all of the women and children and almost all of the men. We're told there were 600 male survivors, and it seems that that was it in Benjamin. But they've got 600 men left, and that's all that exists within the tribe of Benjamin anymore. They've burned cities to the ground. Things have gotten very bad. And how are 600 men going to be able to perpetuate a lineage in a land that was promised to them? That's not going to happen. Of course, the tribes were allowed to intermarry, so normally that wouldn't be completely a matter of extermination. But they've made this oath. They've said, none of us will give our daughters to Benjamin, and now they're stuck. So let's ask a couple questions about this. Why can't they just break the oath? They made it rational. Yeah, go ahead, Andrea. Yes, go ahead.
My version says the men of Israel died from this to the Lord at Mizpah. Does that mean that they're doing it at that city, or is that a specific part of the
Say that last part again.
It says the men of Israel made a promise to the Lord at Mizpah. Is that the city or like a
So Mizpah was that city. If you remember from last week, when they all gathered together to hear of a Levite's complaints, this is a flashback to what happened in chapter 20. Mizpah was a city where they all gathered to talk about what had happened, and that's where they decided that they were going to go and attack Benjamin. Let me see where it says specifically. So this is right at the beginning of chapter 20. We see the congregation assembled as one man to the Lord at Mizpah. That's the name of that town there. They've all presented themselves in the assembly of the people of God, and the people of Benjamin knew that the people of Israel had gone up to Mizpah, but were not present there at that meeting. So this is referring to that event and how they all made this vow that we're going to exterminate Benjamin, but also vowing, now we learn, that they're not going to give their daughters in marriage to them. So why can't they just go back on that? Clearly they've changed their minds in that Benjamin should no longer be completely destroyed. Why can't they just give their daughters in marriage to them anyway? Dave.
I may be wrong in this, but excuse me. When you make an oath, it's like then, people make promises all the time.
Yeah.
When you make an oath, back then, it's sealed, done, and you
Yeah.
can't just say, oh, make an oath, and not make an oath. You
Yeah.
can't go back on it. The bad thing about it is it's a foolish oath, because they didn't think it through.
Right.
I'm perplexed at why Benjamin did what he did.
Yeah.
Gilead was under Benjamin, so I don't know if he was trying to save face or what. It's
Yeah.
a peculiar thing.
Yeah.
That's, an oath is, I looked up the oath, and it's like rock solid.
Yeah.
We're warned against making oaths.
Right. Yeah, so there's a lot of stubbornness that's gone on here. Stubbornness on the part of Benjamin to not make this right when they could have. They could have given over the men of Gibeah. They could have fought for justice in this. But now that the oath has been made, no, you can't just go back on an oath. This is basically the same discussion we had when we talked about Jephthah, right? Jephthah vowed to sacrifice whatever was the first thing to come out of his house if God would give him the victory. That first thing happened to be his daughter. And because Jephthah did not know the covenant very well, he did not know that there was a redemption price that you could pay for a hasty vow. And so we're left with the implication that he follows through with the oath. But they understood intuitively and specifically from the law, you cannot just go back on your oath. God will not hold you guiltless if you do that. And they've pronounced a curse upon anyone. It doesn't say that here, but it'll say that later on when they reiterate the wording of this curse. That they've pronounced a curse on anyone who breaks this vow, who gives their daughters to the people of Benjamin.
Yeah, I'd like to add that when you make those kinds of oaths, and this is me speaking, you have to look at the intent of your heart when you're doing that. And theirs wasn't in a good place. It was
Right.
anger, revenge, whatever you would fill in.
Yeah.
I think that would cause a problem.
Absolutely. I definitely agree. If the motivation had been justice, then they would have followed the mechanisms that they were supposed to for justice. They would have investigated the matter carefully. They would have, called more than one witness. They would have heard from the people of Benjamin themselves, heard from the men of Gibeah themselves before going, and they would have also limited their judgment against the city of Gibeah because that's what they were told to do. You limit your judgment against the city that has erred in this way. It's clear that this isn't really about justice. This is about anger gone crazy, about rage, about the divide between the tribes. They have trouble trusting each other. They have trouble viewing each other as brethren, as one united family and nation. And so it's easy to hear an outrageous story about what happened in Benjamin, which was actually mostly true, and to let all manner of justice go out the window and say, let's go destroy them, let's go exterminate them. That's what's happening here. They've decided to eradicate Benjamin, and we don't need to hear any more details or consider the ramifications of our actions. And now, somehow, this is God's fault. This is a tale as old as time, that God says, don't do this thing. Man does it anyway. And then man blames God, saying, why did you do this to us? It's not God's fault that you didn't listen to him. It's not God's fault that you broke the covenant. And when it turns out horribly, that should be an indication that God knew what he was talking about when he told you not to do that. Yet the people don't get that here. They're appealing to God. They built an altar. They offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. But God is silent. There is no answer from God here. He's not going to let them off the hook. He's not going to give them an easy solution. He's not going to allow them to break their vow. Instead, they're left to come up with some kind of solution to this. Andrea. Okay.
So in the previous chapter, we read that they were kind of like a battle with them.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're kind of lost to try.
Yeah.
But how can you rejoice in battle with them? That's their
That's a good question. How is it that they've changed their minds so quickly? Again, I think this is another mark in favor of this being an emotional reaction that they had, that they heard an outrageous story, which again was mostly true, but still, rather than carefully consider what the right course of action was, they jumped straight to extermination. Once the emotion of it has died down, now they remember, hey, they're a tribe like one of us. They are our people. But look what we've done to them, or rather, as they're saying, look how God has abandoned us. Look how God is, all these crazy excuses that they're coming up with. But the point is that they do regret the fact that they've attacked Benjamin, but we get some whiplash. We're going from chapter 20 to 21, it's like, weren't you the ones who were attacking Benjamin? Yeah. But now they wish that they hadn't. So they're left to come up with a solution, and they start asking some questions that give us some clues as to the direction they're going with this. rather than keep their vow in an honest way, they're looking for some sort of technicality to get around the vow. That is not really the point of vows. Just let's get that out there from the get-go. That you make an oath and now you're trying to find some sort of technicality to get around it. But that's what they're going to do anyway. And they ask in verse 5, which of all the tribes of Israel did not come up in the assembly to the Lord? For they had taken a great oath concerning them who did not come up to the Lord to Mizpah, saying, he shall surely be put to death. So they're kind of taking roll call, figuring out who was and wasn't there, and whereas before they were angry at those who didn't come to Mizpah and who weren't a part of this, now they see that if there was anybody who didn't come, this could be an opportunity to use them. They did not take this vow. And so maybe they could be the saviors in the situation. It says in verse 6 that the people of Israel had compassion for Benjamin their brother and said, one tribe is cut off from Israel this day. What shall we do for wives for those who are left, since we have sworn by the Lord that we will not give them any of our daughters for wives? So, who in Israel wasn't a part of this oath? Is there anybody who is not bound by these terms that could possibly give wives to the people of Benjamin? They determined that, yes, there was somebody. So, somebody tell us about that. Who was it but didn't come? Yeah, town of Jabesh Gilead. And they've determined, okay, nobody from that city came. So nobody from that city is bound by this oath. Now what's the next very logical step from here? So they believe. Your hint is that it's not logical at all. Go kill everybody. Wait, isn't this like how we got started? The problem was killing people? No, the answer is always kill more people. That's how you fix every problem in Israel. Just go and kill more people. So they get 12,000 of their bravest men together and say, go and strike the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead with the edge of a sword. Also, the women and the little ones. So, men, women, children, kill them all. Just leave. Who is it that we need to spare? Yeah, the young virgins, the young women of marrying age, the ones who would be good, suitable wives right now. Everybody else, just go ahead and exterminate them all. There are so many problems with this whole plan, but that's what they've decided they're going to do. And so they are successful in doing this. This is the second time in recent history that we've seen the people of Israel go and attack an unsuspecting city that was not in conflict with them, that had done nothing wrong. Dan did it when they were finding a new home for themselves. But those people at least weren't Israelites, so you can sort of see their twisted logic as we'll go, take over these people, destroy them, and use their land, build, where their cities were built. Jabesh Gilead is an Israelite city. So they've fallen even further here, in that they're able to view one of their own cities as a target and a solution to their problem. So they're successful in destroying Jabesh Gilead, killing all the men, all of the married women, all of the little kids, leaving only the virgins who are available to be married off. But it's only 400 young women. They've not come up with enough people. And this is going to be a bit of a problem. Anything else up to this point? Dave?
Well, for me, it seems like they keep making one bad decision to make up for another bad decision.
Yes.
It's like doing the wrong thing every time expecting a different outcome or something.
Right.
Like that. And it's like, all they had to do was repent of that ridiculous oath.
Mm-hmm.
That's all they had to do. And not do what they did. They kept doing the wrong thing to make up for the last wrong thing they did.
Yeah.
It's crazy. It's like,
Yeah.
they're considered because doing a bad decision, to make for another bad decision is only going to lead to a bad outcome.
Right.
So,
Yeah, we're just digging the hole deeper at this point. Andrea? Yeah. Yeah. Their actions have consequences. They are uncomfortable with what has happened, and they would rather come up with some magic solution that makes all of their problems go away. But that's not really the way that sin works. Sin has consequences. Now, let's recap something for a moment. How did all of this get started? What was it that was the problem in Benjamin that made everybody so angry? Yeah. Okay, so the murder of a Levite's concubine. Okay, that was obviously a terrible thing that happened and something where justice needed to be found. But you notice that in their solution, we've had more and more murder to fix the problem of the murder that they started with. So it was the rape and murder of one woman, which is, again, we're not going to excuse and we're not going to lighten at all, that is now leading Israel to destroy thousands of the people of Benjamin, men, women, and children, and now to destroy thousands of the people of Jabesh Gilead, men, women, and children, all to fix the problem of the too harsh judgment upon Benjamin for the rape and murder of one woman. So we have taken a very bad problem and, like Dave was saying, just digging the hole deeper, just making it worse and worse and worse. And it's not going to stop here. This chapter is far from over, and it's going to get even worse. Just thought we should recap that and remember how this got started. Okay, so remember that we had 600 male survivors of Benjamin, and we've come up with 400 wives for them. That is not enough. And they're already in a tenuous situation where we need to make sure this tribe survives, that they don't fade away into nothing. We need wives for all of these men. We need them to reproduce, to have babies, to get some new generations coming. And we can't afford to have any unattached men in a tribe that is in danger of completely being exterminated. And so we've got to come up with another solution. They've already looked, and this was the city that had not sent any representative to Mizpah. There's no other easy solution like Jabesh Gilead to say, well, let's just go and destroy them. Now we need to come up with another solution. And verse 16, notice their great compassion for them. The elders of the congregation said, "What shall we do for wives for those who are left, since the women are destroyed out of Benjamin?" And they said, "There must be an inheritance for the survivors of Benjamin, that a tribe not be blotted out from Israel. Yet we cannot give them wives from our daughters. For the people of Israel had sworn, 'Cursed be he who gives a wife to Benjamin.'" So they're regretting that their judgment went too far, that they had killed too many people of Benjamin. They've not been able to come up with enough wives. And so now they start looking very, very carefully at the wording of the curse that they had pronounced. And let's look at this very carefully together, because, as is always the best course of action with things with the Bible, we must find a loophole so we can do what we want to do. Not the best thing. Okay. They say, "Cursed be he who gives a wife to Benjamin." That word "gives" is so interesting. We can't willingly give our daughters to Benjamin, but The curse doesn't say anything about having our daughters taken from us and giving them to Benjamin. This is a very strange loophole and one that has a lot of horrifying implications to it. Again, they're trying to get around their oath, and they're digging the hole a little bit deeper, just a step at a time. And so, this second solution they come up with, verse 19, they said, "Behold, there is the yearly feast of the Lord at Shiloh, which is north of Bethel, on the east of the highway that goes up from Bethel to Shechem and south of Lebanon." And they commanded the people of Benjamin, saying, "Go and lie in ambush in the vineyards and watch. If the daughters of Shiloh come out to dance some dances, then come out of the vineyards and snatch each man his wife from the daughters of Shiloh, and go to the land of Benjamin. And when their fathers or their brothers come to complain to us, we will say to them, grant them graciously to us, because we did not take for each man of them his wife in battle, neither did you give them to them, else you would now be guilty." This is the solution. This is the answer to all their problems. Go hide in the vineyard, wait for the women, these young women, to come out and to start dancing, and then just grab the wife of your choice. Go run back home with her. Now she's yours. And I know courtship was a little bit different back then, but not this different. This is not how this is supposed to work. This is not a good solution for them to find wives, but technically, nobody has given their daughters to Benjamin. Their daughters have been taken by Benjamin. And that's completely different. So that fixes all the problems here. Gary.
The occupation of attorney goes back a long way.
Yeah. This is just something else, isn't it? And notice that it's the rest of the people of Israel who have come up with this solution, who are very complicit in this. They're the ones who plant this idea in the Benjamites' heads. It's not Benjamin who came up with this in their own desperation. It's the rest of the people who are working very hard to get around their own oath, which again goes against the spirit of an oath, and are now commanding their brethren to sin. Lots of problems with this. Lisa?
What happens when you try to control the outcome?
Yeah.
None of us are guilty of doing that, I know, but
Yeah.
when you think you can control what happens,
Yeah.
you're using your own limited ability to do that, and you aren't relying on God or God's word or scripture or
Yeah.
anything that has to do with the standard. You create your own standard.
Yeah.
It usually ends up the way this is.
Yeah, this is a definite distortion of the way that justice was supposed to be sought. Remember, we read this last week, that when they heard of something outrageous happening in one of their cities, they find out the answer of what's really happening there, they investigate it carefully, and then they mark that city as harem, as devoted to destruction, and they go and bring their judgment against that city. This rampage that they went on throughout all of Benjamin has created a lot of strange side effects. And now that they're trying to control the results and control how this can be fixed, they're only making opportunities for more and more sin. And I want you to notice from their perspective, all of this seems forced. We have no choice but to do this. And this is a very good lesson for our lives. When you get involved in sin, you end up in a lot of very difficult situations where you feel like the only way out of this is to sin more. But it just keeps leading you down a path of more and more sin as things continue to get worse. So very serious problems here. They've started from justice that went a little too far, or a lot too far, to now blatantly murdering and destroying a whole city, and commanding their brethren to sin, and doing this great harm against these people of Shiloh, against these young women, and against their families. A lot of evil is happening here. And it all started with one case of evil in Gibeah, which was an atrocity. that now has spiraled into more and more evil. Nobody in this story is coming off very good. That is the point of this. Nobody in this story is doing what they're supposed to be doing. Dave?
What's astounding to me is I don't see them ever turning here right now. Going, let's see what the Lord thinks, or maybe
Yeah.
repent to the Lord for this stupid oath.
Yeah.
It's just let's find a workaround around it.
Yeah.
A loophole. There are no loopholes in working with God.
Yeah.
There is repentance of that. It's just that's a good takeaway for us.
Yeah.
You know, not to try to work around God to manipulate
Yeah.
what God says and does.
Right.
That is so true today, though. People still try to do it.
Yeah.
It's just you see the outcome of it.
Yeah. Looking so hard for a loophole to fix things instead of repenting. Even when they called out to God at the beginning of this chapter, they weren't repenting. They were blaming God. They were saying, God, you are the one who's done this, and aren't you going to fix it? No wonder God didn't answer. there's nothing to answer. Betty?
And the very thing that you were mentioning there, they're outraged because of the rape,
Mhm.
that kind of thing, and yet they sold their very own daughters to be terrorized. Can you imagine the terror in those women at that time?
Yeah.
They were there to worship the Lord, and they were snatched up, kidnapped, taken and raised for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
So it just, they don't mention much about that in Scripture. Sometimes they think maybe we just kind of gloss over
Yeah.
that. But it was a horrible thing that these women were subjected to.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the irony to this, the very twisted irony, is that they were outraged over the concubine being abused and being raped. Is this much better? Is this any better? You know, go and grab the wife of your choice. Like, no, this is not better. Lauren?
I was gonna say, just not pointing
Yeah.
out the irony, but also how the chapter ends with verse 25, repeating the phrase of those days. So,
Yeah.
in Israel,
Yeah, that's the story here. Everybody's doing what they think is best moment by moment, and that's not working out well. Yeah, Mark.
Yeah, you can see in verse 15 there that this was God that created this breach between all the tribes. And the scripture there doesn't contest that.
Mhm.
And I think it's because it's their thinking. This is the way they wrote it, because this is what they think.
Yeah.
But I'm perplexed a little bit as well. Phineas is the priest.
Mhm.
Phineas should be making all these decisions. We see previously that he kind of haphazardly eventually asks God for some guidance. You see that they have faith. Again, they do have faith. But they don't have the correct faith. They're not looking to God to solidify that faith. They're not asking God what to do. God raised this whole nation from two people. If there were only 600 of them, he could have easily raised Benjamin. Easily.
Okay.
Even though they messed up,
Yep.
he could have fixed it. God could have fixed it at any time. But they're not asking God. That's the only thing I can see here with this.
Yeah, really this should come down to, one of two different choices. Either they need to appeal to God, they need to appeal to God either way, but when they appeal to God, either the answer is going to be the consequences of your choices, that Benjamin is going to die out. And that's just because of everything that has happened here. And let this be a lesson not to turn away from God, not to go your own way, seek his guidance and do things his way. Or the answer would be that God is not going to let them die out. He's going to, fix this, not the way that makes them feel better, not the way that justifies their actions and takes away their guilt, but in the way that preserves Benjamin, because the justice has gone too far with them. And probably there's going to be a much longer standing rift between Benjamin and the rest of the tribes as the lingering wounds of this attack had happened. What they want is to find a way to fix things for Benjamin so that Benjamin will be, ingratiated to them. and to make the problem go away so that Benjamin won't be exterminated. And there's just not really a solution that allows for that. Andrea?
I was gonna say about this whole 2 chapters, it just shows how selfish humans are.
Yeah.
It's just sad that without God, just like evil.
Yeah, right. And that's the story of Judges for us. That, without God, the evil grows worse and worse. And we're looking at these stories and we go, how could things have gotten so bad? How could they be so depraved and so lost without God? The point is that this is not all that unique. This is the result of what happens when you're away from God. It can take a lot of different forms, but this level of depravity is the logical extension of living your own selfish life. Later?
It reminds me of Hebrews chapter 1, verse 1, where they were lucky that God was talking to them personally.
Yeah.
And what more now, these were written to us as Colossians 3, chapter 3, verse 16, something like that, that all these things were written for us. Now that we know that this has happened, that we need to kind of look into it and prevent everything in the future.
Yeah.
In our deeds. So I thought that there was one piece, one action of lie at one time. That's what you have said. It's going to look for a loophole to it's fire.
Yeah.
And this is the reason I believe that these were written for us.
Yeah. Absolutely. Lauren?
And this whole idea of the ends wasn't versus God's goes back to the beginning of time of the garden, where they thought they could never do what was right in their own eyes and not to sin. And I don't think it's an accident that we have accounts like this all throughout Scripture of man struggling with this idea. It's not only a warning for us to it happens in our lives.
Yeah.
Just should hopefully give us all those red flags to try to make different choices.
Yeah.
Not bad,
Mhm. And our attempts to scramble and to fix things so that we can just solve the problem. It's like David, sending with Bathsheba, sleeping with Bathsheba, and thinking, oh, the solution to this is, pull her husband from combat and we can hide it by pretending that it's his baby. When that doesn't work, well, now the solution is just kill him. We've gone from a moment of lust and lack of self-control, which we're not going to justify and we're not going to make excuses for, but this, adultery, now to murder to try to cover up the adultery. And this is the pattern of sin. It grows. It gets bigger than we ever imagined it being because we're trying to fix it. If instead we can repent and rely on God, then we can get forgiveness for those sins. But that's a completely different path than what we so often see happening. Dave?
Well, it strikes me, not funny, but curiously. You notice that they repeated there a couple times that there was no king in Israel.
Yeah.
That's a physical king.
Mhm.
But I submit to you that there was a larger, more than larger
Yeah.
amount of people that had no spiritual king.
Yeah.
Because when you're under a king, you submit to the king's will. So, did they? No. So that tells me they had no spiritual king. Now, there were some that I know.
Yeah.
Overall, the idiotic decision-making paradigm here
Yeah.
doesn't include God. And
Right.
That means that they're not submitting to God. They're not looking to God, like you said before. I think that there's no king in Israel phrase is a dual type of phrase, and
Yeah.
that's what's going on here.
I think so too.
And today, it's the same thing going on. Okay, I mean, there are lots of faithful people who look at as God as their king and submit to his will, but then there's a lot that are not.
Yeah.
So we need to consider that, because if we submit, we can get influenced by that other half,
Yeah.
then we're in it the same way.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You know, you read through Judges, and towards the end, we have this thing repeated. You know, in those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And there's a like geopolitical nature to that, of that there's no physical king there. And so there are 12 tribes that have these weird shifting alliances and shifting friendships. And sometimes they get along and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're at war with each other. And so you see, yes, there's no king there, and yeah, it's all leading to what's going to happen in 1 Samuel, but they're going to get a king to unite them physically as a nation. But also, we're left with this reminder that they never had to have a physical king. That was never like the most desirable thing. There's some reference in Deuteronomy to this understanding that they would end up with a king eventually. And so don't know that it was entirely sinful for them to end up with a king. But at the same time, the way it was started from the beginning was that God was their king, and that needed to be true all the time, whether they had a physical king or not. But if God had remained their physical king, their spiritual king, and they had acted like it, then these problems would not have revealed themselves. These problems would not have been there. And they wouldn't have needed the physical king to draw them together in this more peaceful unity. So yeah, there's a dual layer to this. Everybody does whatever they feel like, and that's on a tribal level, but also on an individual level. Mark?
Yeah, you find out in Kings that doesn't help either.
Right, yeah.
Having a king won't help. And so the point is absolutely true. God needs to be the king.
Yes.
Central to everybody. It just helps if you have a king that is looking to God.
Yeah.
I did want to note real quick that, as you've said, that this is kind of written out of historical order. Phineas, again, is the head priest.
Mhm.
He's one generation away from Eleazar.
Right.
And that brings light to what is said in earlier on, that everybody who was under Joshua's leadership continued to do God's will until they all died. And then we see Eleazar died. Next generation, that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And it just brings to the fore that thing that we always talk about, how important it is to handle God's word correctly and look to Him to make sure we're doing it right.
Yeah.
As right as we can get it.
Absolutely. Oh yeah. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say that it's interesting that how you were saying, like with David and Bathsheba, his sin didn't just affect him; it spread. And just like their sin with Benjamin, it spread. It was almost worse than what had originally happened, just how far it went.
Right.
And to know that when we have sin in our life, that it doesn't just affect us; it spreads. And if we don't stop it, then we can cause other people to sin.
Yeah.
And that's really true.
Yeah. This has become, as horrible as chapter 19 was, and it was horrible. Like, none of us had any fun in chapter 19. That was really a dreadful class, all things considered. This has not gotten better, has it? It's gotten worse. This is just as dreadful. This is worse in many ways. It sometimes doesn't feel as bad because when there's more than one person involved, our misery and sorrow about it kind of gets abstracted a little more. We identify more with a harm being done to one person than we do to a group. But look at how this has spread. The atrocity that's been committed against the Levite's concubine is now being committed, hundreds of times over. And that's not a good development. This call for justice has created more problems than they even started with. And this is a disaster in the making. I wanted to point out another thing about this second plan they came up with, about just kind of go and seize the wife that you want, seize the woman that you want, take her and make her yours, which, yes, is a rape there. But also, when dealing with the problem, or dealing with the protests of the fathers and the brothers, Remember, they are honor bound to seek justice when their daughters, their sisters have been wronged in this way. And so, of course, they are going to complain. Of course, they are going to say, what has happened here? We need to make this right. There's a two-pronged approach to dealing with that. The first is kind of this nice thing of grant them graciously to us, because we did not take for each man of them his wife in battle. This is a problem, and since you didn't give your daughters to them, it's going to solve this very easily. So why don't you just be quiet and let this happen? But then also, secondly, there's an even more sinister implication, where they say, neither did you give them to them, else you would now be guilty. And I see implied in that is this idea that it's, you didn't give your daughters to Benjamin, right? Because you would be cursed if you did that. And if you make too much of a fuss about this, then maybe we'll just turn this around on you and say that you did give your daughters to them. And what's the alternative here? You think there was some mass conspiracy to kidnap all these young women? It's kind of just gaslighting them in a way here of, there was no mass conspiracy to kidnap all of them. Why would you think that would ever happen? All I see is the town of Shiloh didn't abide by this oath. They gave their daughters to Benjamin. Now we should come and destroy Shiloh. So there's this very sinister undertone to that of maybe you should just be quiet about this lest some bad things happen to you. Whether you see that in it or not, either way, the end result of this is everybody goes home. There is no justice in this. The Benjamites get their wives. The people of Shiloh have lost their daughters and sisters, and everyone just goes home. And truly, there is no king in Israel at this point. Some things need to change. Righteousness needs to come back to the nation. They need more unified leadership. And we have some more judges to talk about, just not in Judges. We're going to talk about Eli and Samuel, and we're going to see the advent of the first physical king, who is a more rightful king, rather than what Abimelech was doing and some of these others sort of declaring themselves to be king. So next week, 1 Samuel, make sure to grab a book and to be ready for that. Thank you all.